Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So, under the radar, heavyweight prospect, if you can call him that anymore, fought last night. He moved to 16-0 with 14 knockouts. He fought in Russia in St. Petersburg against an undersized journeyman in Vitaly Kudakov. Now, it was an 8-round affair that went the full distance, meaning this is Jalalov's second fight going the full distance. The fight prior to last night, he also went the distance against Ukrainian journeyman Ihor Shevardutski, who was stopped in a couple of rounds by Martin Bakhodir a couple of years ago. Quite frankly, the last two performances now from Bakhodir Jalalov have been less than impressive. You look at Jalalov, he's a 6'7" southpaw, long reach, power, athletically gifted, moves his feet very quickly, relatively fast hands for a man of his size. You know, you look at him and you think to yourself, yeah, this guy is the mould for a potential heavyweight champion, a top contender. Combine that with his amateur pedigree, and you think you're onto a winner. And bear in mind, you know, Bakhodir Jalalov is one of the most successful super heavyweights in amateur history, a two-time Olympic gold medalist. However, you know, when the guy turned pro, he turned pro way back when in 2018, but he kind of switched between the amateurs and the pros. When he turned pro, because he was young, you know, unique attributes for a heavyweight, I was quite excited. But the more I've seen from him, the more I don't really expect him to do all that much as a pro. And last night was another example. We have mentioned in the past when we've spoken about Jalalov that in the amateurs, he always had the reputation of being an on-top fighter who struggled with guys who could get down and dirty and apply a bit of pressure, stay on his chest, close the distance, close that reach of his, and make it an up-close fight. We saw that way back in the day when he fought Joe Joyce in the amateurs. He struggled with that physical robustness of Joe Joyce, that relentlessness. And even against Frazer Clarke to a lesser degree, he kind of struggled in that fight. He beat Clarke, but, you know, the caveat is, in that Olympic fight, Clarke, the fight before, suffered a really bad cut, so it affected his game. But even then, you know, Clarke's kind of physical strength and kind of bully boy tactics was giving Jalalov trouble. And I often wondered whether that would manifest in the pros. Well, last night, Jalalov fought, like I said, a very undersized heavyweight. I mean, he looked like a cruiserweight to me. He looked about 6 foot, you know. Went in that fight with a record of 7-3, 3 of his wins coming by way of knockout. Hadn't been stopped, so seemed fairly durable. But, you know, Jalalov started that fight flicking the jab from that southpaw stance, not putting any mustard on it. He was throwing like straight quick punches, but with no real power. He wasn't loading up on his left hand, because he does have power in that shot when he does. But in this fight, he was boxing and moving, trying to look pretty, trying to look cute. It was like he was using his, like the amateur style, like an amateur point scoring style. And early on, he was outboxing Kudakov. But towards the mid-rounds and towards the latter part of this fight, Jalalov was starting to feel the pace. It looked like he was unfit to me. Kudakov was able to get close on Jalalov and rough him up a little bit on the inside. And in, I think it was round 5, it looked like Jalalov got dropped. But the referee never called it a knockdown. To me, it looked like a knockdown. And he finished the fight horribly. On the cards, he won it widely, an 8-round unanimous decision. But I've got to be honest, to me it was a lot closer than the judges had it. It was a competitive fight, and that's very worrying signs for Jalalov. Again, 31 years old, no time to fuck about now. 2-time amateur Olympic gold medalist. You know, he spent all that time in the amateurs. So now as a pro, he's got catching up to do. And already at this low level, we're starting to see deficiencies in his game. Again, fight before, Ihor Shevardutski, tough guy, built like a fridge, but doesn't really bring anything in terms of skills and talent. But he was able to go the distance. Would Shevardutski go the distance with, let alone a Moses Talma, would he go the distance with a guy like Richard Torres? I don't think so. Torres is kind of embarking on his own pro career, and famously, Jalalov starched Richard Torres in the amateurs. He beat him a couple of times. He starched him in the World Amateur Championships, and I think he beat him in the Olympic Games as well, on points that time. But as pros, if those two guys were to fight tomorrow, I'm taking Richard Torres. To me, Jalalov, in the last couple of fights or so, he's been doing his best Huey Fury impression. No power in his punches, not trying to commit. Any sign of danger, it looks like he gets uncomfortable very quickly, very easily. David Price vibes, seems to get hurt a little bit. Got hurt in this last fight. Actually got rocked very early in his pro career as well. Over in Mexico, I think it was. I can't recall of a fight off the top of my head. I don't know whether it was in Mexico or against a Mexican fighter, I forget. To me, he seems like the type of heavyweight who's got the heart of a pea. And he seems, just seems like an on-top type of boxer. And I'm not convinced by his chin. I'm not convinced by his cardio. I'm not convinced about his dedication to the professional ranks. Bear in mind, this guy's from Uzbekistan. And in that culture, becoming a gold medalist in the Olympics is seen as more valuable, more impressive than being a pro boxing champion. That's the pinnacle to a lot of these kind of like Central Asian and Eastern European countries, the Olympic Games. And, Jalalov completed the amateur circuit. Again, 2-time Olympic gold medalist. Very rare, very rare for a fighter to become a 2-time gold medalist in the Olympics. He did that, and he did it quite easily. But as a pro, I'm not seeing the development. In fact, from what I've seen in his last couple of fights, I think he's going backwards. He's not displaying that same level of explosivity as he did in his early pro fights and a lot of his amateur fights. He's not showing that. He's not showing that side of him who brutally knocked out Richard Torres in the World Amateur Championships. It seems like he's treading water. I think he's got a pro deal with Top Rank, but we all know what's going on with Top Rank right now. Reality is, at this point in time, at 16-0, at 31 years old, a 2-time Olympic gold medalist, at this point in time, you have to throw him in there with somebody who's worthwhile, who's worth a damn, who's notable, who brings something to the table. Because these sort of fights are clearly doing nothing for him. Is he stagnating? Is he just not that? Is he not cut out for the pro game? Or does he need that step-up opponent to where he can bring the best out of himself and, be switched on? I've got a feeling he's just not good enough, to be honest with you. I don't think his style translates to the pros. That's what it's looking like to me. And physically, I've got many concerns about this guy. As I do mentally as well. I think the guy is wanting in a lot of areas. And I think there's a lot of guys in the heavyweight division right now who maybe 2 or 3 years ago wouldn't have fought a guy like Jalalov. But now, I'm sure there's guys out there who are looking for the opportunity. Me personally, if we're talking about realistic fights for him, maybe a guy like Efe Ajagba would be a really good fight. Ajagba can really punch. He's very limited in his own ways, but he can really, really punch. And it's a massive step up compared to what Jalalov's been doing as a pro so far. I think that fight makes sense. Jared Anderson is still knocking about. He's a top-ranked fighter. Why not have Jared Anderson versus Bakhodir Jalalov? Because Top Rank win either way. If Anderson beats Jalalov, they can sell it as a rebuild. He's just knocked out a 2-time Olympic gold medalist. He's back. Anderson is back. They could sell that. And if Jalalov wins, it's a step-up win. It's an in-house fight. Makes sense for them, right? But there's fights out there for Jalalov. There's fights out there for him. Even a guy like Guido Vianello, maybe. That could be a fight for him. I'm talking about these types of guys. But we need to see something from this man. I'm not interested in watching this guy fight obscure opponents who I don't even know who they are. And let alone, he then struggles in these fights. Not interested. I want to see this guy thrown in with somebody who's half decent. That's all I want really from this guy now. We want to see how he reacts at a higher level. Again, maybe he's one of those guys who needs to step up, who needs to respect his opponent more. Maybe. I don't think that's the case. I just don't think he's cut out for the pro ranks, personally. Got a lot of good attributes, like I said. Good foot speed, southpaw, 6'7", decent hand speed, decent athlete, etc. Got a lot going for him, but I think he's missing in a lot of areas. And last night's fight really highlighted that. But anyway, share your thoughts below. Beanie Guy Del Boy, peace.